Ladies and gentlemen, with the unenviable task of following that, please welcome William Dartmouth, MEP.
Thank you very much. I wonder if there's anybody else here who remembers the late, great Frankie Howard. Yes. And in case you, thank you. And in case you do, one of his great lines was, "Do not mock." Are you mocking? Do not mock. Which, of course, came from the biblical phrase, "Do not mock the afflicted." Well, I wasn't going to talk about the Labour Party, but as we're here, I feel I ought to. The Labour Party has, of course, elected Tom Watson and Jeremy Corbyn. And when one thinks about it a bit, they really are cartoon characters come to life. In fact, they're even called Tom and Jerry. We're going back in time a bit, so let's go back in time to the debate on the euro, whether Britain should enter the euro. And you may remember all those BBC programmes that led with assertions that some international company would pull out of Britain unless we joined the euro. Well, we're not in the euro, and those international companies are still here. The BBC was biased then, and the BBC is biased now. And here are 5 facts, principally relating to trade and the EU, which you won't hear from the BBC. Fact 1. Switzerland. Here's a slide. Switzerland has an economy less than 1/4 the size of ours here in the UK. Switzerland is not a member of the European Union. Nevertheless, Switzerland exports to the EU more per person than the UK, to the tune of 4.5 times. And this fact you will not hear from the BBC. Fact 2 is here on the second slide. The value of the trade of the top 20 non-EU countries trading with the EU was an incredible €2,590 billion in 2013. To illustrate the sheer amount of this is more than the entire economy of France. It's more than the entire economy here in the UK, and it is even more than Tony Blair got paid last year. The important point is this: a country does not have to be a member of the European Union for its businesses to trade successfully and have full access to EU markets. And this is another fact that you won't hear from the BBC. Now, the next slide here I only did it yesterday, I only did it last week, but it may be a bit out of date, actually. But certainly in 2014, Germany exports more cars to us here in the UK than to any other country, even including the United States. This fact Nigel Farage has said many times, but you won't hear it from the BBC. Now, fact 4. The European Union has over 100 trade agreements with countries outside the European Union. These trade agreements enable, to a greater or lesser degree, reduced tariffs or tariff-free trade. And there is the list. We in the UK are the European Union's biggest market. Moreover, we have a large and ever-increasing trade deficit with the EU member states. We pay them much more than they pay us. The European Union has trade agreements, amongst others, with Mexico, Chile, even Madagascar. It follows that an EU-UK trade agreement on Brexit, although it is not absolutely necessary, is nonetheless absolutely inevitable. And this is a fact that you won't hear from the BBC. Now to fact 5. You often hear the proposition that free trade requires the free movement of people. Let's look at NAFTA. As most people know, there is a North American free trade area composed of Mexico, Canada, and the United States. It is usually known by its initials, NAFTA. In value terms, NAFTA is approximately the same size as the EU markets, including us. But with the very successful trading bloc that is NAFTA, there are border posts between the United States and Canada. And there are border controls, even with high fences, between the United States and Mexico. With NAFTA, there is free movement of goods, services, and capital. But there is no free movement of people. Not at all. And this is a fact that you won't ever hear from the BBC, or for that matter, the mainstream media. Now, even with the good old EU, well, it's not so good, but you know what I mean. The EU has 141 trade agreements. Over 130 of these trade agreements, to be precise, 137 of them, do not have a free movement of people clause. Now, the Prime Minister systematically goes around implying something very different, but it's just not true. Now, final fact. As we all know, Japan and China are full participants in the 21st century global economy, and not even Tom and Jerry would deny that. In fact, China's exports in 2014 were 1.5 times ours. Japan's exports in 2014 were 1.5 times ours. China's exports were 5 times ours. But in neither country, and this is the important point, is there any material, non-ethnic immigration. None. And in case anyone requires a translation, because we're very international here, niente, zero, zilch, no immigration at all. And these are facts on trade and immigration, which again, you won't hear from the BBC. On the other hand, what you will hear from the BBC endlessly repeated is quotes, 3 million jobs, unquotes, disappearing on Brexit. Frankly, this is tendentious nonsense. The only people who will lose their jobs when we leave the EU are MEPs such as myself. I think that got about the biggest round of applause, actually. The BBC is a statutory corporation operating under a royal charter. It is paid for by us. The BBC Charter states that the BBC has, and I quote, a mission to inform, educate. But on the European Union, the mission is thrown out the window. Basically, the BBC is only interested in carrying stories which put us and our cause in a bad light. The BBC has replaced its mission to inform, educate, by a mission to make as much mischief as possible for UKIP and those who support it. We saw during the general election campaign the over-the-top interview with Nigel as UKIP party leader. And we see all the time the audiences at question time and any questions. The loaded interruptions from the Dimbleby brothers and the rest, being in favour of a European superstate, irrespective of the evidence, runs in the very DNA of the BBC. The evidence is clear. The BBC is already doing everything it can to stack the odds in the referendum. It is high time this stopped. Sadly, most of the British mainstream media behave like lambs. They don't even have the intellectual energy of sheep. They follow the establishment line. They are wrong to do so, and here's why. Let's take the example of Iceland. Iceland has a population of just 20,000 more than the borough of Doncaster in which we are now. But Iceland trades, and trades successfully, on its own and on its own terms with the whole world. Iceland even has a trade agreement with China. By comparison, the EU has no trade agreement with China, and the frolics of George Osborne this week in Beijing are just that, frolics. So long as we remain in the EU, the UK is, they don't change the facts. So long as we remain in the EU, the UK is unable to enter into trade agreements with China or anybody else on its own. Iceland can negotiate its own trade agreements. We cannot. So long as we in the UK remain in the European Union, our commerce, business and industries are hampered by alien regulation. Our English common law is made inferior to the rulings of foreign courts. Our National Health Service is hobbled by EU directive. Our people are subject to the European arrest warrant. Our fish are stolen. We cannot even choose what vacuum cleaners we use, or the wattage of our ovens. The European Commission extends its sway over us even unto light bulbs. And this is why we need to be out of the EU into the world. Thank you very much.